Moving on didn't fix it, did it? You did everything right. You put distance between yourself and the memory, built a new routine, and maybe you even found someone new. Yet, in those quiet, unguarded 2 a.m. moments, it's still there. Not them, but something underneath them that followed you into every room you've walked into since. You think you lost the love of your life, but what if I told you that person never actually existed the way you remember them? What you're about to see is the reason why the ache won't leave, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. By the end of this, you'll realize you didn't lose a soulmate. You lost an illusion that was masking a much older wound. This channel exists for one reason: to have the honest conversations about love and pain that most people only get to have with one trusted person at 2 a.m., if they're lucky. I've spent years looking at the mechanics of why we stay broken long after the person is gone. And what I've found is that moving on and actually healing are two completely different solar systems. Tonight, you aren't just getting over someone faster. You're going to understand what heartbreak has actually been trying to show you so it stops repeating itself in a new person's face every few years. Here is exactly what you'll walk away with. First, you'll understand why your successful recovery, the one where you stopped crying in the car and started sleeping normally, might actually be a trap that's keeping you stuck. Second, you'll see the specific moment the heartbreak actually ends. It isn't when time passes or when someone new arrives. It's when one particular thing finally clicks into place. And third, you'll know exactly what to do tonight to stop the cycle. If you've ever felt like you're over it by every visible measure, yet there's still a room inside you that you haven't opened, stay with this. It's worth it. There is a version of heartbreak recovery that looks like success from the outside. You reach a point where you stop checking their profile, and you even laugh genuinely again. You have whole weeks where they don't cross your mind. When someone asks if you're over it, you say yes, and you mean it. But there is a room inside you where the real questions live. Not, why did they leave, or what did I do wrong, but the ones that feel too large and too quiet to look at directly. Questions like, why do I keep ending up here? Why does love always seem to come back to this same ache, no matter who the person is? Most people don't go into that room because nobody told them it existed. They were taught that moving on means staying busy, staying positive, and finding someone new. But that skips the most important step. Think about a woman named Priya. She went through a breakup at 28 that genuinely broke her open. She did everything she was supposed to do: therapy, traveling, giving herself time. By 30, she was with someone genuinely good, patient, honest, and present. But 6 months in, she started to feel it again. That same low-level anxiety. The quiet fear of being too much. The habit of making herself smaller during conflict just to feel safe. Different person, same room. Priya hadn't healed. She had relocated. Moving on says, I'm done with that chapter, but healing says, I understand what that chapter was trying to teach me. One gets you out of pain temporarily, but the other makes you someone who stops recreating it. Here is the open question I want you to hold on to. What if the heartbreak was never really about the person who left? What if it was always pointing at something that's been there since before they even arrived? Because the answer to that question is where healing actually begins, and it is not where anyone told you to look. We're about to look at the stories we tell ourselves to stay safe, and this next part is where most people make the mistake that keeps the cycle going for decades. After every painful relationship, we build a story. The story explains what went wrong, who was responsible, and what we should have seen coming. It feels like closure, but most of the stories we build are actually designed to protect us from a harder truth. The story keeps us focused on the other person, their choices, their flaws, their failure to love us, so we don't have to look at what we brought to the relationship or what we were using it to prove. Take Marcus, for example. His story was airtight. His ex was emotionally unavailable. She prioritized everything over him, and she made him feel invisible. All of it was true, but the story stopped there. What Marcus spent 2 years not looking at was why emotionally unavailable people felt so familiar to him in the first place. Why had he chosen this dynamic 3 times? What was he getting, in some quiet, complicated way, from loving people who couldn't quite reach him? He never asked those questions because the story of her being the bad guy was more comfortable than the truth of his own pattern. The pain of your breakup actually has 2 layers. The first layer is about the person, the loss of them, the future that no longer exists. That layer is real. It deserves grief, and it does fade with time. But the second layer, the one that doesn't fade, isn't about them at all. It's about what they're leaving confirmed for you. Something like, I'm not enough to make someone stay. Or, the people I love always eventually leave. Or, being fully seen is what makes someone go. These aren't rational beliefs, but the body doesn't run on rationality. It runs on pattern and repetition. If your earliest experiences taught you that love is conditional, then every heartbreak since has just been landing on top of that original lesson, making it feel more and more confirmed. This is why moving on doesn't end it. You can move on from a person without moving on from the belief they're leaving triggered. That belief becomes the lens through which you see every relationship that follows. This is what Priya finally understood in her good relationship. The problem wasn't her new partner. The problem was that she was still waiting for confirmation of a childhood belief. That love had a ceiling and she would eventually hit it. Once she saw that, not as a concept, but as a real thing she was doing, the dynamic finally shifted. You cannot change a pattern you haven't named, and you cannot name a pattern you haven't been willing to look at. Here's what I got wrong about this for a long time. I thought the goal was to stop feeling the pain, but the goal is to listen to it. The heartbreak was a messenger, not a punishment. It wasn't evidence of your worth or confirmation of your worst fears. It was a messenger carrying information about something unresolved inside you that had been waiting, quietly, to be seen. Every time you moved on without opening that message, the next relationship just delivered it again, louder, in different handwriting, but with the same content. Heartbreak ends, not when someone new arrives, and not when enough time passes. It ends when you finally read the message. It ends when you look at what the loss confirmed and ask yourself honestly, has this always been the fear? And is it actually true? That moment of seeing, that willingness to sit in the discomfort of the real question instead of the comfortable story, is the click. Once it happens, something shifts permanently. You stop looking for someone to disprove your fears and start looking for someone who doesn't trigger them. But there's a catch. When you finally stop the pattern, healthy love can feel incredibly unfamiliar, even threatening. Why does the good one sometimes feel so wrong? We're going to resolve that right now. Remember that question from the beginning. What if the heartbreak was never about the person who left? The payoff is this. The person you think you lost was just the latest delivery system for an old message you refused to read. You didn't lose the love of your life. You lost the latest opportunity to ignore yourself. When Priya finally looked at her room, she realized she wasn't afraid of her partner leaving. She was afraid of her own belief that she was unlovable being true. When she challenged that belief, her anxiety didn't just lessen, it evaporated because there was no longer a pattern for it to feed on. The click happens when you realize the person you're mourning is an illusion you built to hide your own unresolved patterns. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it, and that is the moment the heartbreak truly ends. But this leads us to a new problem. If you've spent your life in chaos, safety feels like a threat. Why do we push away the people who actually show up? That is the next step in this journey. If this landed somewhere real for you, subscribe to keep going deeper into the mechanics of love and pain. The next video on why healthy love feels wrong is already there. And if you're figuring this out, it's exactly where you need to go next. The work continues. Let's keep going.